more efficient. And one fun little piece of trivia is that people who know SQL earn more than people who don't. And so it just seemed very appropriate, this being a Bloomberg sample teach lesson, that we talk about, say, how to do something macroeconomic, like, with all the extra money that you're going to earn, let's work out where's a nice corporate tax haven that you can set up for the future. So you'll notice in the chat area, I've put 3 links there, and that's the tools and the background and today's data. So you don't have to do this now. If you've done it already, that would be great. I'm just struggling with Zoom and how we actually say yes that you have done something or haven't done it. So maybe we'll just use the chat session for the moment. Can I get a yes or a no that you have already installed a DB browser or a SQLite tool? Amy and Cassandra?
No, I'm sorry, I have not.
That's all right.
Nope, we don't have any of this software.
Not a problem at all. We'll do things as kind of a interactive together kind of activity. Just to make things a little bit confusing, I'm not going to use the SQLite program to demonstrate. I'm going to use this very, very delightful big white screen here that you can see, because I found that when I teach, it's convenient to have high contrast, really big fonts and that sort of stuff so that it's easy to read. In fact, the things that I type in here, that's an example query we're about to look at, is the most important thing in the session. So it's nice to have it completely focused. Okay, so the KPMG World Corporate Tax Data has 8 columns in it. So it's a SQL table, and the columns are the tax rates in those countries for the last 6 years, plus the GDP in millions of US dollars in the previous year, and the country. So 8 columns, 6 of them are about tax. One of them is just the name of the country, and the other's GDP. So that's the table. It's called nation data, and that's the table we'll work with today. And obviously what we want to do is we want to be able to do some filtering. So we'll start with the most simple filter there is, which is just an equality filter, where we're asking, I would like just a row to be equal to have a value in it which is equal to something else. So I'm taking it that you've already done some SQL before. And so this first example up here, the select CY 2018 from nation data, makes some sense to you. What that's saying is, give me the 2018 column from nation data. How about I just type that into this window here? And of course, what that's going to give me is that whole column that just flew off the screen so quickly you probably couldn't even see the numbers at the top, of tax rates for different countries, but it doesn't actually tell you which country it is. So let's flip back to this screen here and say, here's where we're going to add a where clause to a select statement. And if you can see my mouse here on the second clause here saying where country equals Andorra, that means just show me the rows, instead of showing everything, just show me the rows where the country column happens to be Andorra. So should we do that example, only let's change it. What country should we do? What's a good country?
Australia?
Australia, sure. Very, very polite of you to say, what's a good country? And the answer comes back Australia. And so you'll see that we have a corporate tax rate of 30%, which is highly relevant to me. Or we can do the clause another way around. So let's look at this one here, the last one on the screen, which has just been blocked out by my PowerPoint thing. Yep, okay, there we go. So that last one, select country from nation data, and this time, instead of the constraint being on a country, we're constraining it on the tax rate. So we're saying, tell me the countries where the 2018 tax rate was 35%. So let's have a quick look at the answer to that question. So tell me all the countries from nation data where the 2018 tax rate was 35%. And there's the list of whatever it is, 7 countries there, where the tax rate is even higher than it is in Australia. So let's do a motivational question here. So if you'd already had your environment set up, then we could do this as an exercise. But what we'll do is some sort of joint thing here. So the question is, when I've earned lots and lots of money from knowing how to use SQL really well, and I'm setting up my overseas corporation, what's a country that has no corporate tax rate? That's my question. So how can I run that query? Let me get you started a little bit. I know that the question is, I want to know the country. So clearly I have to select the country, and I've only got one database, so it's nation data. And I know that it's got to be a where clause. Can anyone finish this off for me? What would I do in order to find countries that have no corporate tax in 2018?
You want to do where the tax equals 0?
Yep. So the 2018 tax equals 0. And here are the places that you can set up your offshore tax trust. Anguilla, Bahamas, Bahrain. I'm very partial to Vanuatu, by the way. That's the only one in the Pacific region. And the reason they have no corporate tax rate is because most of the languages of Vanuatu don't have number systems, and it's very hard to make tax systems that way. Okay, now what we just did there was we compared a column against a number, but we can compare it against other things. So we've got more operators to learn, and also more values that you can compare things to. So apart from equals, we can also do not equals. So I could have run that same query and asked the question, what countries don't have 0 corporate tax, which would be a not equal to sign. That's that first one up there, exclamation mark equal. I could also ask greater than or equal to. I could ask less than or equal to. And there's even a between. So if I was looking for a range of values, I can do that as well. Now, on the right-hand side of one of those operators, or on the left-hand side, you can put some kind of value. And the simplest value, and we did an example very close to this one, is give me, say, where the column name CY 2018 is greater than a number here. So that's where CY 2018 greater than a number that you've typed in, and of course that's going to return those things. But it doesn't have to be a number. You can also compare one column with another. So you could compare the 2018 tax rate against the 2017 tax rate. And it doesn't even have to just be a column. It can be any kind of arithmetic operation. So looking at this last stanza here, which just got hidden by Google Sheets again, 2018 greater than 2017 plus 0.1. So any kind of expression can be done here as well. So just, I'll take a step back. These are just some sample examples. What do they mean in kind of English terms? What am I doing here? In that first example there, I am comparing the 2018 tax against 0.5. What's that meaning in words?
You're looking for countries where the taxes in 2018 are greater than 50%.
Yep. In other words, really heavily taxed. The good citizens of these countries can justifiably complain about their taxes if they want to. Let's look at the next one. We have a word for the situation where the taxes this year are higher than the taxes last year, or at least a phrase. What am I looking for here?
If there was a tax hike.
That's what I'm looking for. And what's the last one saying?
I actually can't see this one, but Cass, I'll let you take
Okay.
it.
I'm not sure what I can do about shifting the shape of the screen up. Anyway.
Oh, you know what? I just had to make it full screen, and when I did that, I can see.
Oh, good. Okay.
But I'll still let Cass do this one.
I was going to say I can see it, but I don't know if I know the answer. This wants to know. No, I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't want to postulate.
So, I mean, we would describe that as taxes have gone up by 10% in the last year. So that was a really, really significant tax hike. A very interesting question to be asking sort of macroeconomically about where have things changed quite dramatically. Okay, so put it together. We can do some really fun questions here, and I know that you'll be able to get one of these countries correct because it's very relevant to you. So, what countries reduced their corporate tax rate in 2018? So, I'll do the starting of that. We're looking for countries. Select country from the nation data. Where? So, the motivational question is, where was the corporate tax rate in 2018 lower than 2017? Amy or Cassandra, do you want to have a shot at it?
Okay, so we want to know in what countries was it? So then we were just doing a less than, right? So
Yep.
Okay.
What am I doing less than?
We want to know where they went down. So we want to know where it is less than it was in 2018. So
Okay, so
right here. So 2018.
Yep.
And
Be
then
less than?
2017.
Yeah. Okay. And I think you might have heard about that one in the news. We could even get really fancy about this, and we could add the columns in so you can see what the 2017 and 2018 tax rates were for each of these countries. I'm hoping that's all visible on screen, that we're not having another sort of lost the bottom bit there.
It's all visible.
It's all visible. Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of tax drops, Vanuatu, I think, is the most interesting country that went from 34% tax to 0% tax in 1 year. Turns out that was like a failed experiment to try corporate tax that went very badly. United States one, I think you heard about that in the news, and so on. Let's ask some other questions. Now, I've just talked about tax so far. I wanted to spread it out so we can also talk about GDP as well. That's a number. So we could ask what countries have a small GDP. So are there such countries? Okay, so it's obviously very similar beginning. Select country from nation data, where, and instead of doing things with CY218, we can say GDP millions. And obviously, how do I finish that one off to get countries with a GDP of less than 500 million?
Less than sign 5. Is it 5 with all the zeros, or okay? I didn't know if it was.
Yeah. Oh, GDP. Note that I've got a nice little error there. That column doesn't exist, so obviously I can't possibly do the comparison I just asked. But if I put an S in there, it'll all now work quite happily. And yes, the tiny island nation of Anguilla in the West Indies, very small country, and I think it was actually one of the ones in our first list of tax havens as well. Okay. Now, I've got one more mind-bending thing just to finish it off, as I only have 10 seconds left, but I'm going to beg out to an extra minute. We can ask in the red box here, this select max GDP millions. You might have seen that if you've done some other bits of SQL. I'm finding the value in the GDP millions column that is the biggest number. And so if I just type that in just for fun, select max GDP millions from nation data, it's going to return back a select max with a space in there. It's going to return back a number of something like $2 trillion, which you can probably guess which country that is. And that's just one value. It's one row, one column. So it's perfectly legitimate for us to compare that or do an equal sign comparison or a greater than comparison to that value. So you'll notice in the second query here, it's quite a long query. I'm doing a select country from nation data where GDP millions is equal to, then open brackets, and then in that I've got that select statement. So that's going to tell me the country in the nation data table where the GDP millions is equal to some value. And of course that there's only one there, but it could well be several. If there were several countries that were tied on GDP millions, then this query would return multiple values. But let's just run it and we'll see what it looks like. And I think you know the answer anyway. Select country from nation data, where, and hopefully I can fit that on the screen. Oh, didn't quite get that right. Where GDP millions equals that, and lo and behold, the United States is the country with the highest GDP in the world. So here are some exercises that you can either do now or we can do later. We could look at what countries have a higher tax rate than your home country, because we can do a select query to get that tax rate and then we can compare against it. We can also ask, which country has the highest tax rate, because we can compare against the max value on, say, 2018. So, summarizing, what we have done is you've recognized when a SQL query is filtering rows because it has a where clause in it. You've used some of the most common operators, equals, greater than, less than, and we've seen the different kinds of expressions. We've seen constants, we've seen columns, and we've seen subqueries. And most importantly, we've looked at how you can take really common ideas like, where's a tax haven, where a country's heavily taxed, where has there been a tax break, into where clauses in SQL statements. If you want to do some hands-on self-practice, I've put these following questions up, but that's the end of the session.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Greg. I feel very informed. Awesome. Thank you. That was a great 15 minutes. And so the next step here will be to give a little bit of feedback, so take a second to breathe while we do that. And just as a kind of a note for feedback, the way that I generally do that is I just kind of take notes on everything, and then I'll usually let other folks go first with their feedback. And if there's anything that sort of wasn't mentioned that I feel like I need to highlight, then I'll go through it. So in this case, we've just got Amy on as the other person. So I'll let Amy go first. No pressure, Amy, with whatever feedback you have for Greg. And Greg, you probably already know this because I know you've worked on campus, but we typically do feedback here at GA in the form of grows and glows. So glows being, this went well, grows being, this is something we would like to see improved on. So that's just kind of an FYI if we sort of use that terminology. So yeah, that said, Amy, I would love to hear whatever feedback you've got for Greg.
All right. First of all, thank you, Greg. That was a really fun 15 minutes. And I am new to SQL, but I really feel like I was getting it there. So that was awesome. I felt like that was just a really well structured and engaging lesson. Just from the way you set it up as the beginning, at the beginning with sort of what's being taught, but then like, why should I care? As we know, that's kind of like the most important thing for adult learners. So especially for a group like Bloomberg, being able to root it in that really specific business case of like finding a tax haven was really cool. And then in terms of your actual delivery of the information, very clear, great pacing. I liked that it felt really conversational, which is, easier when you only have two people in your class, but I get the sense that that's kind of how you deliver lessons, and keeping it with that kind of vibe definitely, makes people feel comfortable and makes people want to participate. So I really appreciate that. I don't have a ton of grows. I think one that I would call out is, just making sure you're checking for understanding along the way. You did that by, asking us to answer questions, but, with bigger classes might be an opportunity to kind of switch up the way you check that everybody's staying with you. But in general, that was an awesome lesson.
Thanks, Amy. Awesome. So yeah, Greg, let's see if I have anything on here that Amy didn't. Let's just try to make sure I hit the stuff she didn't. Take too many notes. Yeah, so I love that you were really intentional with rooting it in the type of work that they would be doing. You sort of started off by saying, like, what we're really trying to do here is turn your business concept into a where clause. And I think that was a really important thing to point out. A lot of times how this gets used can get kind of lost in them just like learning the mechanics of it. So I think starting off with that sort of sense of like, here's why we're doing it and here's how you use this information was really good. So just wanted to make sure to highlight that. I like that you were clearly like specifically set up for online delivery. The fact that you like bothered to do the white background and larger font was really helpful. I've sat on a lot of these where literally we can't even really see what's on the in the, I don't know what you call it, the software. And so it was really clear that you were like prepared specifically for an online course. So I really appreciated that. I think throughout you did a really good job. One of the things that I stress a lot of times to our instructors is trying to get to the, in a very basic sense, what happens when I do this to the data. And you did a really good job of making sure to point that out each time. So as opposed to just saying like, here's the steps for how you filter, you were really clear to say like, here's what's going to happen when you do this and here's why you do it. And so I think that was really great. Overall, super well organized, really well structured, and just all of the sort of necessary teachery things built in there, which I really appreciated a lot. So yeah, one of the things I really liked that I wanted to highlight too is that you gave a lot of real world references. That's super, in my opinion, super important to this type of content because you've got to be like linking it to something that folks are familiar with. So just the very idea that, you know, literally the data says that the US has the highest GDP, and maybe that's something that we all assume we know already, right? But this is the data telling us that it's real. I think that kind of stuff is super important. So I was really happy to see that. And then this is really just one, it's really just one kind of grow, and it's not really going to be super specific to this lesson. One of the things that I want to be mindful of is that this particular cohort is an online class, and the group size is probably what, like 25 to 30, somewhere in there. So one of the things that I wanted to just chat and touch base about is from the facilitation standpoint, sort of what adjustments would you make for a larger audience? And I can give you kind of a specific to what I'm talking about here. So I noticed that most of the questions that you asked were sort of pure kind of call and response is what we would call it as educators, right? I'm going to ask this question and whoever answers is fine. Obviously, something like that would be a bit trickier if there's 30 people. And so just wondering kind of what adjustments you think you would make for something like that based off of the fact that it would be a larger group.
If this was an Australian group, I would keep a roster list, as in I'd have on a piece of paper on the side of my desk that had the people's names, and then I would just cycle through the names and call individuals. I'm actually a bit stumped as to how I'm going to do that with a Hong Kong crowd, because I probably, if I ask, I'll just get silence. So I actually still stumped about how to get that kind of engagement. So I think what I'd probably do is I'd probably immerse a couple of group chat questions or something like that, because people will type even though they might necessarily want to speak, and try to get confirmation that things aren't going too badly wrong that way. The other thing I'd probably do is, I mean, obviously we'd have some lessons, some exercises in the middle, and maybe I would sort of prefix it with, you know, in 5 minutes' time, I'm going to, you know, randomly pick a couple of these questions and ask some people for their, you know, what they've done on this, so that it forces them to actually do the exercise. And then hopefully I'll be able to pick up on, you know, which people aren't succeeding at the exercise. A bad idea that I haven't tried and I don't know if it would work or not would be Kahoot, something like that. So run something and then there's, you know, give me an answer. That'll tell me whether people are getting things right or not, but it won't really tell me who is having problems until I'm sort of seeing the Kahoot results at the end. So I don't know. I'm still thinking about that one.
Yeah, no, totally. You don't have to have all the answers for that. Certainly no one does. If we did, education would be a much better place. So yeah, totally don't expect me to have all the answers. Actually, all of those adjustments that you suggested, I think are pretty spot on. I was going to suggest sort of random selection as one of the best ways to manage to facilitate communication when you're doing an online class. It's just such a time saver really too at the end of the day. Like instead of waiting for someone to respond, you're just going to call on someone, and the expectation being that when you call on them that they're supposed to respond. And just kind of when you do something like that, you just want to manage expectations a little bit, right? So let them know at the beginning of the course that that's the sort of thing you're going to be doing. And then also let them know that, like, you know, this is all in the spirit of learning. No one should ever feel bad if they get the wrong answer. That's totally not the point. It's not to get the right answer. It's to talk about how we got there. You know, so there's a little bit of expectation setting that has to happen when you're going to do something like that. But I think that that was spot on in terms of making an adjustment for the audience size. One other thing I would encourage is, as much as possible, and you should have help with this, you won't be delivering this on your own. You'll have at least like a facilitator or someone else on the line helping you out. So one of the things that I would really encourage is to find ways for the community to interact with one another. And so that way it's not so much like they're just sitting and listening to you talk, like the same way that we would do if they were in a physical classroom together. We want them to be talking to each other. So one of the things that we can do on here is like open up separate chat rooms or try to figure out a way for people to communicate sort of one-to-one. And I think that that would also be kind of a nice thing to try to throw in here just from a facilitation perspective.
Yeah. So how do I split up separate chat rooms here?
You know what's funny? I'm actually not sure, but I know that our facilitators do it all the time, and I'm not sure. Amy, do you know?
Yeah, I do. So it has to do with how we set up the Zoom room at the very beginning. So like you probably don't see all of the options that you would see if we set up the room with kind of like the maximum number of options. And what we would probably do is have, you know, like Cass said, whoever that facilitator is, you know, just like in advance of class, letting them know like, hey, the exercise that I'm going to do after the filtering section, you know, please break people into 3 Zoom rooms. And it's actually really easy. They just kind of like, they can do it randomly, or you can select people. And then when you break them into rooms, you put like a time. So if it's a 10-minute exercise, it automatically counts down. And then when 10 minutes hits, it automatically pulls people back into the main classroom.
Yeah.
So
I've seen that before
it's nice.
in the tools, but I've never seen it in Zoom before. Like I've only ever had these Zoom meetings. So I was quite surprised to hear that, oh, it's got all these capabilities I've never heard of before.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Cool. Thanks, Amy. I actually didn't know the answer to that. Yeah, so that was all. And then the only other piece of feedback, Greg, that I had, which is it's difficult to do here because it's such a short period of time, but just always try to remember that one of the things that people really expect from a GA instructor is that they're including their own personal background and experience into things. So whenever possible, you know, if you can give a case use for like what happens if you do this the wrong way, or there was this one time that I was trying to figure this out and I did it this way. So whenever you can kind of sprinkle in your own stories, it's always super, super helpful in the classroom too. Awesome. Well, I think that's it. I don't think I need to see you re-demonstrate anything else. I just wanted to kind of touch base on how you would adjust to a larger audience. And it sounds like you're thinking about those things. So that's really awesome. And I just think overall, this was a very strong sample teach. And we were really, I think, lucky to have you come on and do this for us. It definitely made sense to me the entire way through, which is usually not the case because I'm not a data person, and I actually really understood this the entire time, and it was enjoyable, and I think just overall really good. Just the, you know, the one thing about sort of adapting to audience is really it. So yeah, that's it for me.
Offshore tax haven now.
Yes, exactly. We know exactly where to go. Awesome. So then this is the portion of our hour where you get to ask questions of us. So is there anything we can answer about sort of GA general or about Bloomberg specific? Anything you want to know at this point?
It's not a question, but here's where I'm up to on organizing schedule and stuff like that. The contract that I'm on at the moment will finish up in August, but they want to renew. So if we can change it to Mondays and Wednesdays, that will be enormously easier for me.
Okay.
There will be 2 Wednesdays in about October that I won't be able to deliver because I'll be in the West Coast, and I think the time zone of that is just a little bit risky. I think it's finishing at 5. I would be starting at 5:30 Pacific time. I think 5:30 to 8:30. So I could at a pinch do it, but I'm not confident that I'd be able to necessarily get back to an office or anything like that in time to do that. So that's about where I'm up to. If you can't find anybody else to fill things in.
Okay, great. So Mondays and Wednesdays
Is
are possible, except for 2 Mondays in October, or for 2 classes in October.
two Wednesdays in October.
2 Wednesdays. Sorry
because
about that.
the 2 Mondays would be Sunday on the Pacific.
Okay. So the good news is we were supposed to start like communicating with participants and getting them, taking assessments and doing pre-work already this month, but Bloomberg hasn't actually selected participants yet, which means nobody knows the dates of this class anyway. So I think there is flexibility. So I'll go back to our sponsor and see just what may be possible.
Yeah. Thus showing that procrastination delivers benefits all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Greg, I wanted to just remind you too that we would prefer obviously to have, as much continuity in instructors as possible, but there's a possibility that we might break this up into units. So there's a chance that, we might not have to do like the entire delivery. So that's something that we can think about if you've got some dates that we need to work around.
Yeah. I mean, we could do Click then, for example. That was one of the ones that I think you cropped up. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not worried by this, but it's just, sorry, I'm not worried by Click. It's just like that might be a convenient thing where I can hand things over to somebody else. It might even just be those 2 lessons. We get some Click person specifically to do something advanced or something like that.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, I think we'll obviously work with the sponsor and talk about that stuff and try to follow up with you on that. But thanks for letting us know. Anything else we can answer for you about Bloom at this point?
I mean, obviously, there's we have to negotiate rates, but I think that's Michaela that's going to do that. This is being funded by Bloomberg worldwide, or it's being funded by Bloomberg in each region?
So the contract in and of itself is it's originating out of our U.S. headquarters. So it's going to be paid out in U.S. dollars and treated like a U.S. contract. And so what that means for you personally is that I would chat with Michaela. I would let her know what our sort of standard is for this kind of work. She would let me know, because it's different, obviously. And then from there, we would kind of negotiate. Mostly what we do is offer folks what they would be making on, like, if they were a normal instructor in our US pool, and, it's more or less the same. But we do just try to maintain some standards. For all I know, you could be getting paid like a lot more in the area that you're in. And I want to make sure I look into those things. So Michaela and I would work together on that. But yeah, I would be the person that you would talk to about those rates, and I could get you all that information.
Yeah. Most of my business at the moment is denominated in US dollars.
Okay.
So the stuff I've been doing for Michaela, of course, is denominated in Australian dollars because it's for Australian audience.
Yeah.
But in this case, since you're earning in US dollars, you'd rather spend in US dollars.
Yeah, anytime the contract it originates here in the US headquarters, it always pays out in US dollars.
Yeah. So I'm happy with that.
Okay, awesome. Well, if you don't have anything else for us, I think next steps are obviously just to work a little bit on the scheduling, and then Amy and I will do that and follow up with you. I might not have an update for you by the end of the week because I'm going to be out on Friday, so we'll just see. But if not by the end of the week, definitely early next week, you should be hearing from me with some sort of update.
Yep. Well, of course, today's Thursday for me. So,
oh, that's right. I keep forgetting.
So if you had an update by tomorrow, I'd be very impressed.
Yeah. Well, yes, update by our Friday maybe, but if not, definitely earlier in the week.
Yeah. So yes, it doesn't make that much difference to me whether it's Friday or Monday, because I'll be collecting that on Tuesday anyway. So
yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. This was a pleasure. It was really fun. And thanks for taking the time to do it. I do have it recorded, which is really nice because that means that you won't have to do this again.